They're really out here selling a stick with rubber bands on it for $23, and the rubber bands are thankfully included. But what's not included are sticks for your stick with rubber bands on it.
Do you hear the message too? The Chaos Gods speak clearly now. It is as though 1,000 mouths cry out in pain.
Look at this, Amazon's got a 44% off sale.
Sanity is for the weak.
Alright, to be fair, they made this thingy and that's pretty good. But then they stopped making this thingy and they made this thingy instead. And like, this thingy is cool, but how are you supposed to... It has no flat edges. Alright, the next thing we're gonna need is a wet palette. It's pretty much a necessity. If you're painting without a wet palette, you're doing yourself a disservice. This one's from Redgrass Gaming. I'll link the thing in the description. Basically, just pour water on it. You let the sponge soak the water in, you dump the extra into a water cup, and then you add this parchment paper to the top of it, and you just struggle with it for about a minute to try to get it flat. Alright, so there's basically 3 types of brushes that you're gonna want to be running. The first is dry brush. This is really a detail brush, or any brush that eventually just wants to die but you don't let it. We'll get back to that one. Then you have your base coating brush. This is just kind of a whatever brush. You don't care if it dies or lives because eventually it turns into a dry brush. That's the life cycle here. And then you have a fine detail brush. Starts out as a fine detail brush, then becomes a layer brush, which then becomes a dry brush. That's just how it is. Don't spend a ton of money on these. Generally you want longer bristles. Longer bristles hold more water and they hold a finer point. A lot of beginners, their first instinct is to do something like this because it's like, oh, it's a super fine point, but this doesn't hold water. These brushes die really quick because the water or the paint just dries on the end of the tip, ruins your tip. This brush has had 2 droplets of paint on it ever, and it's already bent out of shape. So these are generally, I use them just for whatever because they come in a bag of like, for $7 you get a pile of brushes and 2 of them will be good. So the best way that I've learned to go about this is like a back forward method, or like bottom to top method, or I guess I've heard it called like getting dressed. So basically the idea is you want to hit the areas that are the furthest and deepest in first with paint and work your way out. So that way if I paint this inside of her cape or you know, breast or whatever, I don't ruin the paint job that I've done on this leg, or you know, I don't mess up a boot because the furthest away thing is already pretty much done. So that's how we're gonna get started. These are my Slaanesh Cultists for Kill Team. So I'm doing hot pinks, pale skin, gold, metallics. So this is kind of the whole bang, and then we'll do the base at the end. So if you're not familiar with how to use a wet palette, simple. You grab your layer brush that you don't care about. You grab a blob of paint. You close your GW pop because inevitably it'll dry out. And run it here, and you can already see that the water from the palette is kind of watering our paint down, and we pretty much don't need to do anything else with it. That's a workable size. That's probably enough paint to do her entire dress. So, less is more. So with paintbrush etiquette 101, you basically always want to have a drawing motion towards where the bristles are. So you always want to be kind of painting in this direction. You don't want to jab. Every time you jab, you dull the point, and the life of the brush goes down exponentially. So anytime you can, you want to be one of the things you'll see me do a lot when I paint, I try to find places to kind of brace my hands. This improves handshake. A lot of people have shaky hands, so you'll see that like this finger is holding onto this base. I have the more points of contact, the more stability I have. So like earlier, I was balancing off of her horn, or like you just need to find safe places to put your hands, and you'll get in the habit of it. But that's where a lot of brush control and stability comes from. So like, I don't even think about it anymore. Like, I'm bracing this hand off of her gun. And that just gives me a lot of control. And so for example, I added too much water. Now I can bleed it out of my brush, go in there, and pull it back out. It'll leave some pigment behind, but you can clean up mistakes very quickly as long as your paint is. So next, I want to base tone the flesh. I prefer Pro Krill's Bold Titanium White. That seems to be the best white in the game, basically. So we're going to do the same thing as we did with the dress, except now we're just going to hit all of the flesh parts with this. This is what I was talking about earlier. So she has these bandages on her hand, right? But she has skin underneath those bandages. So by doing the base coating for the skin first, I can paint over the bandages now and just kind of ignore them. And because I'm painting very watery and very thin, it doesn't really affect the contours of anything. So the goal here isn't to get the perfect coat of white, just to establish kind of the tones. So I've changed my mind about the tone that I want the inside of her dress to be. I want the inside to be red instead of hot pink, because that's kind of my secondary color for the bolt. So yeah, just right on top. As long as you paint nice and thin, change your mind a couple times without it caking on. So you can see I missed a lot of the underarm here with the white. I have to go. So I'm just going around making sure everything exactly how I want it before I jump to the next color. painting these boots before I paint the pants because they're harder to reach in there. I'm thinking it's gonna be a lot easier to paint these boots black than it would be to back and retroactively like try to pick these. So one thing I like to do for metallic areas, before I go over them with any metallic colors, I'd like to water down my black a lot. You might know elm oil is good for this. So you'll see me, I have basically my black areas. This side of the paint is watery and this side is just straight out of the pot. So what I've been doing is I just drag paint across and that way I can control how much water I have in my paint at any given time. So generally when I'm painting 10 models at a time like this, I would just paint all the flesh tone, all the pinks. I don't really go in for any amount of detailed things until the very end where I go in through and touch them all up one by one and make them individual. So you can't really see it if I move my hands apart. So this thumb is balancing on the paint holder, and then this finger I just balance right on my thumb and push them against each other, and that kind of gives me a little bit of support. And that helps a lot with the hand shape. Because otherwise it's like, I can do it, but I feel like I have so much less control like this. And even then, like, I'm still bracing this way. You always basically want to be bracing. So what we have left is the tank top thing. I don't even know if that's a tank top anymore. It's just like a covers her breast and her helmet. So for cloth things, I like GW's Xandri Dust. I think it has great coverage, really good paint. And same as before, apply it to our palette. We barely take any paint with us, and we just roll for how much water we have, how much paint we're putting down. So the last thing that's left to do is our metallics. I usually like to save those for the end, especially because if you're doing a batch paint, you're going to contaminate your water cup with the metal flakes, and it's not a big deal, but next thing you know, you're painting black, and your black might have like silver flakes in it, and that's annoying. So I'm going to start with the gold, we'll work into the silvers, and we'll base tone the base. So for the silvers, I like to use Lead Belcher. I think Games Workshop still has some of the best metallics in the game. And just like before, put it on our palette, and we grab like a small amount of it at a time. And then we do the same thing with the gold. My advice with this kind of stuff is make mistakes as fast as you can. The faster you make your mistakes, the faster you learn your lessons. For this gold, Retributor base armor, or Retributor armor base color. One of my favorite golds. It's nice and vibrant, and it's very flexible. So because these are Slaanesh Cultists, they don't have healthy skin, so we're going to use Ari Violet as the shade for it. So with washes, you can paint them generally out of the pot. I like the palette, or even for that, because then it thins it out a lot. And I like putting my washes on very thick, and it's very easy, or very thin, sorry. And your mission here is to just control how much it pools. You want it to pool into recesses and edges and tint the surface kind of gently. If you're following this tutorial along and you have flesh tones that are normal human skin, if you're doing normal flesh tone, this is what you want to put on instead of the violet. That's pretty much a Slaanesh Cultist base coat. So to do the base for these guys, you just use some watered down mahogany and you work it into all the nooks and crannies. Once you're done with that, you just use a watered down black to hit the rocks, and that should leave you with good enough base tones to work off of. And once this step is done, this miniature is pretty much at a battle ready state. You can play games with it without anybody complaining, but you've also set a good foundation for if you ever want to upgrade the paint job on these guys. And that's pretty much it. The bases are done. Everything is base coated. All the products that I've used I'll put into the description of the video, and in the next video we'll get into highlighting and building up the layers.